Hello and welcome to this next online lecture. Today we'll talk about interest groups and money. The focus for the presentation would deal with interest groups. First, we'll look at the different types that are out there. Political scientists break them down into two groups, public versus private. Next, we'll explore the tactics that they use to achieve their goals. Often, they're engaged in direct and indirect lobbying. One of the tactics that's also important deals with money. In a way, that's almost its own separate tactic, but we'll also explore PACs and how money impacts the political process. Since we'll be discussing interest groups throughout the course of the presentation, I should probably define what they are. An interest group is an organization that tries to get the government to pass laws to help its cause. Essentially, it's a group of like-minded people who want the government to be responsive to their needs. That's all it is. Throughout this presentation, several different interest groups as well as PACs will be mentioned. You only need to be able to identify the focus of the ones that are identified here. They're also identified on the lecture outline. You should know the NRA and the AARP in terms of their interest groups. And then there are a few PACs to be able to identify. MoveOn.org, Emily's List, American Crossroads, and the NRA is not only an interest group, but it's also a PAC. So even though I'm going to mention several other interest groups, the only ones that you would be tested on would be the ones that are identified here. Now that we've defined what an interest group is, we should probably explore the different types that are out there. There are thousands of interest groups that lobby on behalf of the American people in Washington, D.C. One type of interest groups, as identified by political scientists, would be public interest groups. They lobby for causes to try to benefit all in society. There are many different types of public interest groups with different focal points. Environmental organizations often lobby the government. Have you ever heard of the Sierra Club? This has been around since the 1890s. One impact that it had was that it lobbied the government to expand the national park system. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, also lobbies these days. Many religious organizations also lobby the government. Religious organizations actually have been lobbying the government going back to the very first session of Congress. An example here would be the Quakers. They were very much against the institution of slavery, and they petitioned the government in the 1790s to eliminate slavery. Today, another religious organization would be the Christian Coalition. You see their website on the right. So, some religious organizations would include the Christian Coalition, which focuses on many different religious issues. Prayer in schools, anti-abortion. It's also supportive of traditional marriage, or it's against gay marriage, among other topics. Operation Rescue is another religious group. It's a single-issue interest group. Its focus is against abortion. Another public interest group would be the National Rifle Association. It also is a single-issue interest group, and it focuses on protection of gun ownership rights for the American people, not just members of their organization, but any American. The second type of interest group would be private interest groups. Their focus is more narrow. Their goal is to lobby the government for causes to try to benefit members of their organization first. Essentially, their focus is on their members, and they want to protect their rights. If other people's rights are protected at the same time, that's fine, but their focus is on members first. Some examples of private interest groups would include professional organizations. These are groups of people who all work in the same profession. Some examples here would include the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, and the National Education Association. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the professional organizations described or mentioned on the previous slide. The AMA, well, this involves people in the medical field. Many doctors belong to the American Medical Association. Many attorneys belong to the Bar Association. You may or may not be familiar with the bar exam that all lawyers or attorneys have to pass in order to practice law. In terms of full disclosure, I should let you know that I happen to be a member of the National Education Association. This involves many people who are educators, many teachers or professors. There are many other organizations as well. Many older Americans belong to an organization called AARP, or the American Association of Retired People. On the right, you see their website. You see some of the specific topics that they're interested in: economic security, health and health care, politics and government, long-term care. So they lobby the government on many issues involving older Americans. Lastly, businesses also lobby in Washington, D.C., whether it's the oil industry, autos, or maybe even the medical field. Businesses and industry also lobby in Washington, D.C. Now that we've addressed some of the types of interest groups that are out there, let's explore some of the tactics that they use to achieve their goals. One of the most important tactics, and most effective, would involve direct lobbying. This is when lobbyists speak directly with an elected official or a member of his or her staff. Often this is referred to as FaceTime, because you get to actually see the face of the person that you're lobbying. Because it's difficult to actually get FaceTime with an elected official, most lobbying actually takes place indirectly. What happens here is when the lobbyists try to mobilize average people like you and me to shape public opinion so that we place pressure on politicians themselves. One specific way that they do this is by using the telephone tree. You may or may not be familiar with the way a telephone tree works. This is how one organization does it. They make a decision that they're going to mobilize their members, and so they have one person make a phone call to 3 or 4 people, and then those 3 or 4 people make phone calls to 3 or 4 more each, and then all of those individuals call 3 or 4 more people, and then they place pressure on elected officials to try to take action on a particular topic. One of the organizations that's been the most effective at using the telephone tree is AARP. In the past, they've used it again and again to contact elected officials to pass legislation that would protect or increase the benefits for senior citizens in the country. Overall, because of their effective use of the telephone tree, AARP is considered today to be one of the most effective lobbying organizations in the nation. Other examples of indirect lobbying include mailings and social media. Mailings involve the letters, or what some people consider junk mail, that we might receive in our mailbox. However, social media has become much more effective in the last decade. Here we see a couple of websites. On the top, we see the NRA's page, but this isn't just their web page, this is their Facebook page. They get a lot of information out, and there are many likes that are on this NRA page, and it's a way to communicate with their members. On the bottom, we see the website for the Sierra Club. Again, this is a way that they could try to get a message out, and here you can see that President Obama is being targeted, and they're trying to get him to say no to a pipeline from Canada down to Louisiana. On the right, we see some Facebook pages, but one of the things I want to focus on would be the circled area here. On this individual's Facebook page, there's a site that's an advertisement that actually helps people find their polling place. These have become so sophisticated that they actually target advertisements to try to encourage people to vote for certain candidates based upon their website visits and their different likes. The top one shows an advertisement for President Obama, and on the bottom we see an advertisement for Governor Romney. Each ran for the presidency in 2012. Another example of indirect lobbying would involve civil disobedience. Here's kind of a textbook definition of what's meant by civil disobedience. It's when a person violates a law on purpose. They violate what they believe to be an immoral law. But then they accept the punishment for violating that law. Why would they do this? Well, the goal is to bring about publicity for their cause and ideally change. Possibly the best example of someone who was engaged in civil disobedience would be Rosa Parks. She refused to move to the back of the bus, and eventually she was arrested. Then the entire community in Montgomery, Alabama mobilized. They used peaceful protest, and they boycotted the buses until a change was put into place. They were successful in the 1950s. The last tactic I'd like to explore today would be money, and how money impacts the political process. Money is a form of indirect lobbying, but it's also pretty complicated, so that's why I've got it down here as a separate tactic in many ways. So what I want to do is I want to look at money, how it impacts elections, the limits that are in place as to how much money people can contribute, but there are also loopholes in the system. Before I move on to money, I want to address one of the definitions that I looked at in one of the first slides. An interest group is an organization that tries to get the government to pass laws to help their cause. Remember that rhyme. They try to pass laws to help their cause. Okay? Keep that in mind. The money side of lobbying involves PACs. This stands for Political Action Committees. PACs, or Political Action Committees, are private organizations. They can be businesses or corporations, they can be labor unions, they even can be interest groups as well. But their focus is on raising and spending money to use in elections. Now, there's an entire governmental agency designed to enforce all of the regulations that come to raising and spending money for campaigns. This is called the Federal Elections Commission. They've actually got a great website that I've used before, and it's called fec.gov. This is their webpage. Now, before I looked at several interest groups and ones that were effective. What I want to do now is I want to look at powerful PACs that raise and spend money in Washington, D.C. on elections. One of the most powerful PACs would be the NRA. Again, they lobby the government as well, but they also raise and spend money and impact campaigns. Another organization you may or may not be familiar with, that's called American Crossroads. They support conservative Republican candidates. American Crossroads has really been a powerful organization for about the last 5 years or so. On the left, we see one of their website. On the right, there's a bit of an image of a commercial that American Crossroads had set up for the 2012 campaign. I would encourage you to click on one of the hyperlinks that's on the Canvas site to this particular commercial. Well, American Crossroads supports Republican candidates. There's another organization that supports liberal Democrats. That's called MoveOn.org. Again, I wanted to show the website for MoveOn.org just as I had for American Crossroads. On the right, we see a bit of a clip from a commercial that MoveOn created for the 2012 campaign. Again, there's a hyperlink to this on the Canvas site, and I would encourage you to see this. By looking at these two types of commercials, we can see the different organizations and the types of imagery and the types of advertisements that they make on behalf of their candidates. I wanted to mention another organization, and this is called Emily's List. Emily's List has a focus of trying to elect pro-choice women to public office, particularly Democrats. The front page for Emily's List is shown here on the right. The name Emily is actually rather unique. It stands for something. It stands for a motto that Emily's List has. It stands for early money is like yeast. If you were to take flour and have some water and add some yeast to it, that flour would then puff up and it would rise. So if you give early money to a candidate who's running for office, it will allow that candidate to acquire even more money. So that's their motto. Early money is like yeast. As you may or may not have recognized, I focused on the NRA and American Crossroads because they support Republican candidates, whereas MoveOn.org and Emily's List focus on supporting Democrats. So, two Democratic-leaning organizations and two Republican-leaning organizations. Now that we've defined some terms and identified some PACs, I'd like to look at some legal limits on the amount of money that people can contribute to candidates, but there are also some loopholes in the system. The legal limits fall under a law called McCain-Feingold. It's named for the two individuals who were shown here. On the left, we see Senator Russell Feingold. He was a Democrat from Wisconsin. And on the right is John McCain, a Republican from Arizona, and you may remember that he ran against President Obama in 2008 for the presidency. The two came together to try to put limits on campaign spending because they thought that it had a negative impact. All that money had a negative impact on the political system. So under McCain-Feingold, there are strict limits on the amount of money an individual is allowed to contribute to a candidate. In a single election, an individual is only allowed to contribute $2,600 to a candidate running for office. An individual is also limited to giving $5,000 to a single PAC. It doesn't matter how much money I have, but I can only give $5,000 to a single PAC and $2,600 to a single candidate running for election. There are also limits on the amount of money that PACs can contribute to candidates. PACs can only give $5,000 to a candidate per election. While McCain-Feingold established strict limits, there are unfortunately loopholes within the system. One example would be super PACs. There is no limit on the amount of money an individual donor can contribute to a super PAC. This is a PAC that goes through an additional process and fills out some additional forms. However, there's a limit on how that money can be spent. No direct contributions from any super PACs can be given to an individual candidate. So you may be saying to yourself, what the heck does that mean? So let me try to repeat that. Super PACs cannot give money directly to a candidate. So MoveOn.org could not give a penny to Barack Obama. But what they could do is they could run an advertisement that supports him. The same was true for American Crossroads. When Mitt Romney ran for president, they wanted Romney to win. They couldn't give a penny directly to his campaign, but they could run advertisements that were against President Obama, his opponent. I hope this makes sense. Another loophole in the system came about a couple of years ago with the Supreme Court decision. This was called Citizens United. What this did was it allowed businesses or corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money on what are called independent advertisements. They couldn't give money directly to candidates' campaigns. However, they could run their own advertisements for or against a particular candidate. They just couldn't give money directly to candidates' campaigns. So what's been the impact of all this spending on political campaigns? Well, some political scientists have described this as negative spending. This isn't going into debt, or it's not spending less money than your opponent. In a political context, negative spending is defined as spending money to attack one's opponent, as opposed to saying, vote for me, I'm a good person, this is my background. It's attacking someone by saying, this person's not qualified, or this person's a bad person for the job. On the left, we see an analysis from a recent series of campaign ads. The number of attack or negative ads far outreached those that were positive or were promoting one candidate over another. This has been more common in the last decade or so, where candidates negatively portray their opponent as opposed to simply, strictly talking about themselves in a positive manner. Well, we're just about at the end. I'd like to review some of the main ideas that we covered in this presentation. So, as a bit of review, this presentation summarized the actions of interest groups. There are different types of interest groups, public and private. They use different tactics to achieve their goals, direct as well as indirect lobbying. Money also plays an important role in the political process. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to summarize these actions and then evaluate something. Do you think interest groups have a positive or negative impact on our political system? Well, that's it for today. I hope you learned something new, and we'll see you in class very soon. Have a good day.